I'm Linda Johnson, and I'm president and CEO of Brooklyn Public Library, and I'm not at all surprised to see such a packed house tonight. I'm too a bit giddy to hear from our guests. Both tonight's authors are local, and I'm sure have lots of fans in this room, so welcome. If you haven't been here before, welcome again. The Center for Brooklyn History is the home to the most expansive collection of Brooklyn history in the world, an astonishing array of books, manuscripts, letters, diaries, photographs, maps, oral histories, and more. And as of 2 years ago, all Brooklynites and all those who are curious about Brooklyn have free and open access to our resources. Researchers, authors, and anyone who is curious can enter to read, to gather, and to learn about our borough. No appointment necessary. Tonight's authors are no exception. Both Jennifer Egan and Hernan Diaz have used historical archives when writing their novels, tapping into the past to craft reflective yet inventive narratives. We're honored to have helped them access some of these inspiring resources, and our staff would be happy to help you conduct your research too. Jennifer Egan is the author of several award-winning novels, including A Visit from the Goon Squad, The Candy House, and of course, Manhattan Beach, a very Brooklyn book. Her moving year-long reporting on street homelessness and supportive housing in New York City was published in The New Yorker in 2023. Jennifer has won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, among other accolades. Her work has previously been named one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times, one of the 100 best books of the 21st century, and one of President Obama's favorite reads of the year. She has supported free speech and emerging authors, previously serving as president of PEN America, and twice as artist in residence in the English department at the University of Pennsylvania. Hernan Diaz has also won a Pulitzer Prize and had his work be named one of the 100 best books of the 21st century by the New York Times. I'm telling you, we are in heady company here. He has published 2 novels, In the Distance and Trust, both of which he wrote while working in various libraries and here at the Center for Brooklyn History. He also used to skip school just to be at his local library. And if there are any kids here, I just want it on the record, BPL does not condone that kind of behavior. But of course, we'll welcome anyone at any time. Hernan received the John Updike Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Kirkus Award, a Whiting Award, and a fellowship from the New York Public Library's Cullman Center. He has a new novel called Ply coming out this fall that I'm excited to get my hands on. Trust and Manhattan Beach are for sale here in the Center for Brooklyn History shop, and Hernan and Jennifer are happy to sign copies after the audience Q&A. Welcome, Hernan and Jennifer.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I haven't seen it since the renovation. It looks absolutely amazing.
Hi. I thank you all for being here. I have to say I feel homesick. I haven't been here either in a spell. And why did we ever leave?
It's true. And I'll just say one thing before we get into our conversation. When I was doing my research here at the beginning, it was not open to the public at all. You had to make an appointment. It felt very chilly and very remote and a little scary. And I'm so grateful and pleased at the openness and the welcoming vibe that it now has.
It was Wednesday through Fridays with very limited hours. And I have to say, I felt that I was sort of in on a secret, and it was unfair because there was this gorgeous building here with the Otmer Reading Room, and these expansive collections, and like nobody knew about it.
It was like 3 people in the reading room
Yes.
when you would have your appointment.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kick off with a very specific question and sort of in a way a boring question, but it won't be boring when you answer it because you're you. Tell us when and how the need for research entered the process of writing Trust.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint that moment specifically because for me, the act of writing starts with the act of reading always. I start reading. I start out with a very vaporous, vague, hazy idea. Capital and isolation, literally, those were sort of the seeds of trust. I'm always interested in solitude and self-confinement. And I thought the myth of capital merited to be addressed, it being such an American kind of form of epic. So I said, I'm going to start the way in which I normally start every project, which is by reading fiction on the thing that I want to read. I don't know how you work, but a lot of my friends refuse to read fiction, and specifically fiction on the topic that they're trying to tackle themselves. That's not me. I want to be fully immersed and know everything that has been written. And I discovered that there wasn't a lot of fiction on the inner workings of capital. Yes, there were many stories and novels and short stories and so on and so forth about the epiphenomena of capital, sort of the strictures of class, the eccentricities of the rich, the oppression of the poor, manners, and so on and so forth. Very American topics, by the way, but not the machinations of capital itself, the cogwheels of finance. And I thought that lack was a great opportunity. I'm not saying that I'm here filling the gap. I'm just saying that it gave me room to do my thing. So I came here quite early on because I knew that the novel would be partially based in Brooklyn, and that had to do with laziness. Because after having written a novel about the West, which I barely know, and again, that's a plus for me because it leaves room for the imagination, I thought, well, I need something a bit closer to home. So I came here, and we can talk about our experiences here, but I would say that this research part started while I was writing in the distance, actually, and it was competing with Ply, which is the novel I just finished. But it started a good, solid 3-4 years before I put pen to paper for Trust. How was it for you?
Also started very early. I mean, my youngest son was in preschool when I was visiting this this library, making appointments, and he is now a college graduate. So that gives you some idea. No, I also began with very vague notions. So it's really interesting to hear how kind of abstract your notions were. Mine were sort of atmospheric. I really was interested in World War II New York through a kind of noirish lens. That's sort of all I knew. And so I actually had a Cullman Fellowship, as you did too, and I was sort of spending time in the library, just looking at photos of New York during World War II. It seemed like a good place to start. And I discovered that in almost every photo there was water. And I thought, the water, the port, interesting. And of course, New York exists because of its port. Its port was incredibly important during World War II. And the fact that I didn't know that already really speaks to my historical ignorance. So I did some research on so what was sort of happening in the port of New York during World War II, and I immediately learned about the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which was the largest shipbuilding and repair entity, I believe, among all of the Allies during World War II. So it was, or certainly in America, it was a gigantically important place. So I came here because there was a collection of artifacts relating to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And what I spent most of my time doing when my son was in preschool was reading a collection of letters that is here from a woman named Lucille Culkin and her husband Al. So they both worked at the Navy Yard. They met there. It was a romance in the workplace. And she was a ship fitter and he was a machinist. And and then he joined the Navy and was gone. So they were madly in love. And she wrote to him every day, usually on her way to work at the Navy Yard. And her letters were fantastic. She was just one of those people that you're so glad someone kept the letters and donated them. And so she described her work. She talked about racial tensions in the yard. Everything you wanted to know, she told. And so it was this kind of intense experience of reading her letters. It was so intimate. She speculated about whether they would have children, what would their lives be like. Somewhere along the way, I realized that she had already passed away, which was really shocking. Anyway, ultimately, she missed him so much, she went to California to join him. And so the letters, of course, ended because they were together. And I missed her so much that I wrote an essay called Reading Lucy about the experience of having been friends with her, even though we never met. And in fact, she had already passed away by the time our friendship began. And it was published in a kind of obscure collection called, it was something about Brooklyn. And I can't remember the title. Anyway, various writers. And a couple of months later, I received an email on a public email address that I had, and the subject line was, "I am Lucy's daughter."
No.
It was amazing. I have to say, I get chills thinking about it. It was one of the most remarkable moments of my career. Man. I ended up going on a tour of the Navy Yard with both the daughters that they had and Al. So Al was now in his 80s on a walker. And we toured the Navy Yard. And he had not been back since the war. He was this quiet man, and he stood, at that point, the Navy Yard also looked very different than it does now. And the old machine shop had not been touched since the war. The old signage was still there. And he just stood there looking at it. Now, Al and I could hardly look at each other because I knew way too much about Al. They were saucy letters.
Oh,
and
really?
He knew it. And so we were sort of, I don't know, this sort of gentleman with his walker. I thought, oh my God, because I remembered things like when she would say, "So just a little kiss and an incy-wincy pinch on the aft end." That was one quote I had put in the essay that I wrote.
That's very nautical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a long anecdote, and in a way, the point of it really is that research for me sort of never, it kind of reached right into my life from the start. And I still am in touch with both daughters. Al ultimately died, but we interviewed him for a project an oral history project that we worked on. And it was quite something. And I owe it to this institution.
It's crazy, and I knew nothing about this. I want to read this piece now. I have two questions for you. One very specific and one more general. The very specific one is, so you read this correspondence and you had this sort of haunted, spectral friendship with this woman across time, which is lovely. But I'm curious. How did that make its way into your work? What did you retain? Did you sort of borrow from it? Was it more sort of a general sense of tone and texture? Were you mining for little details? How did it? I'm sure it made its way into the book, and how?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it made me realize that I really wanted to write about a woman who worked at the Navy Yard. First of all, because
so it started with that was the. Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
That I hadn't even known that. I didn't even know the Port of New York was important. So
right. I thought you were into the project and stumbled upon this.
No, I hadn't.
So this was the
anything.
genesis of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
and so I ended up collaborating on an oral history project with Brooklyn Historical Society, which is what this institution was called then. It was not part of the public library, and the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And we interviewed some 25, well, I was involved in probably 20 interviews, and I think altogether there's something like 40, and anyone who had worked at the Yard. So that was fascinating. We interviewed many women. This was before 2010. So these women were in their usually mid to late 80s, and I think every one of them has passed away. And we interviewed men as well. And a few basic shapes kind of emerged from those interviews. One was just this idea of the work that women did and how extraordinary it was, how unprecedented. The fact that everyone literally laughed at them when they walked into the Yard, and yet they were very good at what they did. Sometimes because they were, for example, for like plumbing and welding, women were more agile and better at slipping into little spaces. So all kinds of interesting details. And then the other thing was just that this again and again, what came up was the word gangster. Everyone seemed to know a gangster in one way or another, which is not really the case now, I don't think. So that was very striking. And there were all kinds of reasons for that, which really have to do with the proximity of prohibition, the fact that a lot of so-called gangsters were really just liquor dealers, and then they went into the nightclub world after that. So it was the beginning, but it was so long before I actually started writing that, in a way, there was a whole different level of research that had to begin later. But I want to get back to you, because you spoke very generally about reading fiction.
Yes.
And sort of years before pen to paper.
Yes.
How did that lead to a way to put pen to paper? And in a way, this is also asking sort of, how do you write? Because there's so many different ways to begin.
Yeah, and there are many ways in which I could begin the answer to this question, which is a complicated one. Look, I realized that, first of all, that I knew all the time that I knew nothing about money, just as I'm sure you knew nothing about welding and rivets, and that's what drew me to the project. I think a very pernicious piece of advice is write about what you know. I feel this urge to reaffirm ourselves in our own little parochial circumstances is a dangerous thing. It can be done beautifully, but I think literature ought to aspire to widen the realm of experience, and I'm interested in that. It's not a prescriptive comment. It's just it describes the way in which I do my own work. So the fact that I knew nothing about finance was a big. It drew me to the project even more strongly. A couple of things became very apparent to me very quickly. The first thing is the polyphonic nature of finance, how finance, to quote this very well-known Brooklyn author, contains multitudes, which is the multitudes of the people whose labor has been appropriated to amass that very fortune. So I thought that the novel should, to some extent and scale down, surely mimic this inner structure, this polyphonic, choral, tectonic structure of capital. And this is why the book took the shape it did. It is 4 books within the book. It's within one book, and it is indeed tectonic and polyphonic and all of those things. So that was one very early decision. I didn't know how this was going to unfold. I just knew that this was now an imperative for me. I don't know how, but the book had to have these qualities. The second thing that I learned, and I should make here a side note, which is I'm a math idiot. I have a PhD in comparative literature, which is as far as you can possibly be from the world of profit. Maybe classics, actually. Classics is the farthest, but the second. And I think there's a classicist in the room. But what I quickly came to realize is that money has the structure of fiction, right? The United States has left the gold standard twice. which means that there is no material connection between the purchasing power of a $5 bill and that bill. It's a convention. It's make believe. Actually, in economics, this is called a fiat currency. Fiat, as in the classic student will agree. Let it be so, right? So, which is the premise of all stories. Let it be so. And this is what sustains financial systems. So, as someone who's very interested in literature that has a self-reflective moment, I seem to be drawn to authors who write in that way. Novels that are wondering what being a novel truly means. Literature that is asking what does narrating mean? How does it work? I'm very interested in that looping Möbius strip-like moment. And once I realized that I was writing fiction about a fiction, which is money, it all sort of kind of came together around that. And it's also a novel about voice. And I thought, well, let's try to think who has held the megaphone of money since money, really. It has been men. You know, the first woman to get a seat at the New York Stock Exchange did so in 1968. 1968, there weren't sort of bathrooms for women, and women had to have a male cosigner to open a bank account in the United States and in most of Europe, all of Europe. So voice quickly became a major concern. So I was trying in a way to find the margins of the margins of the margins. Hence, a woman who was also an immigrant, who was also kind of tainted by her father's political affiliations and so on and so forth, and she would become the mouthpiece of the richest man in the universe. And I liked that profound dissonance. But again, I knew nothing, zero, zilch about money. So I had to educate myself. And I love working with primary sources, just to get a little bit like nerdier. I don't read a ton of history, honestly. And if I do, it's just as a source where I can find primary sources. Like I go to the bibliography at once. And that's what led me here, to the Frick collection, to the Morgan Library, and to other smaller, lesser-known private collections. Because I thought, if I don't know anything about money, I should learn to talk money talk, with the lexicon and the jargon of the 20s and 30s. Because it's a fast-paced world. It's like writing about technology, and you're writing about Thomas Alva Edison. You better learn how electricity was referred to back then and not now, because for all the obvious reasons. So I feel, well, I know that I learned whatever it is that I know about economics, while also acquiring a voice for my characters. Those two things were overlapped. And it was in the process, and now I'm addressing your question, maybe. I'm a friend of digressions, I'm so sorry. And it was through the process of note-taking and learning how these people spoke about their own trade that these voices started to emerge. It also helped that the first section of the novel, and with this I conclude, is a whole novel within the novel, written in this utterly decadent, outdated tone, very, very sort of kind of Jamesian or Constance Fenimore Wilson or Wharton. I mean, turn of the century, slightly decadent fiction that I love. And I was so happy when I had found a conceit just to write in that register, which you otherwise, I mean, you can, but why would you? Yeah.
But just to clarify, so when you say primary sources, what do you mean?
I mean, your letters, those are primary sources. So it's not sources that have been sort of processed by a scholar. It's just the raw materials. That's what I mean. And it seems that you and I, regardless of what we call these documents, work in a very similar fashion.
Yeah, it's true. No, I agree. I mean, another thing that became really important quickly in the book was the idea of diving, which actually gets to a question that I'm very curious about to hear you answer as well, which is sort of what kind of chances can we take in the realm of research? In other words, it's very important to know what actually happened, especially dealing with something like World War II or any sort of well-documented military entity. There are going to be people who know exactly what happened. So I felt very aware of that. And at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, in a certain way, things are very well documented. Like there was a newspaper that came out initially every month, and then during the war, I think as often as every week. And so, what occurred at the yard was known. I got really interested in diving. I'm not even quite sure why. I've never even scuba dived myself, but I came across a very obscure article in a Navy magazine by a guy who had dived in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he was a civilian diver. So diving was so important, salvage diving, and also getting underneath ships before to see what the damage was without having to put them in dry dock. Because even though there were a lot of dry docks, there were way more ships that were damaged and needed to be assessed. So the idea that civilians became divers, for some reason, that had a kind of electric impact on my brain when I learned it. And I have no idea why. I've learned to pay very close attention to those moments of kind of mental frisson, for lack of a better word, that just feel really important, even though it's not something I ever had the slightest interest in before. And I felt that way about diving. So it was very natural, since I was interested in women who worked at the Navy Yard, to be interested in having a female become a civilian diver. And so one thing that was really important to find out, and this relates directly to your point about women's bathrooms and the fact that women had no access to the stock exchange before 1968, could a woman have been a civilian diver? Well, women didn't dive in the Navy until the 1970s. Not one. And they didn't dive in the Army until the 1980s. And in fact, a huge source for me was the first female Army diver, who was a wonderful, and we're still in touch, again, back to the research, reaching into everyday life, a woman named Andrea Crabtree. Anyway, so obviously I couldn't have a military female diver because anyone would say, didn't happen. But the more I looked into civilian diving, the more I realized that it was basically undocumented. It was just kind of a free-for-all. And it happened all over New York. So there was a French ocean liner, the Normandy, that was seized and was being renovated to use as a troop ship along the Hudson River on one of those piers. It caught on fire, and the firefighters sprayed so much water into the ship that they sank it. So this was a huge debacle, and the goal then was to bring the ship back up so that it could be sailed to the Navy Yard to be repaired, and this was all the work of civilian divers. That's salvage work. You have to seal the ship so that it's airtight, then you pump all the water out, it floats back up. They brought it to the Brooklyn Navy Yard only to find that it was too badly damaged to be converted after all that. But there was even a New Yorker talk of the town piece about this effort to find civilian divers and how they were fumbling and things were popping out of the water. They didn't know what they were doing. So I thought, okay.
Wow, when was that published, roughly?
It was during the war.
During the war.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was my entry point, because I thought no one can say it didn't happen. And so many things were happening for women then that had never happened before.
Yeah.
So that gave me a chance to take a moment of license.
Right. And sort of where's the line for you? That you found more than a license, it's an unknown, right? Because there was no record, and that gave you room to do your thing, which is gold. I find those gaps are amazing. But are there moments where you are perhaps bending or going against the record, or
Not really. I used the unknown to my advantage. So, for example, there was a dive tank at the yard where they would train these civilian divers, and there are photographs of that. And I even have a map that shows a tiny little circle that is the dive tank. But I created a building to go along with it. But I know I can't imagine actually contravening a fact.
Right.
A historical fact. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but for me, it feels like in a way that's too easy. Like, can't I find a workaround without contradicting the facts?
Yeah. No, oh, sorry.
I'm curious, but what about you? Do you have that approach as well?
I'm a little bit like you. I believe in sort of in the Oulipian constraints almost that come with facts. Sort of you have a very well rigid defined playfield, and you have to abide by it, and you have to zigzag or slalom around it, and I find that very productive. I love working with constraints, and most of them are self-imposed and ridiculous and embarrassing to confess in public, but they work for me. I don't believe in utter freedom for myself in as a writer, but yeah, I think that that fidelity also comes with a big red flag, as far as I'm concerned, because I think one can very easily fall into the temptation of sort of fetishizing facts, and you know what I mean? Oh yeah, of really kind of writing only to produce some kind of textual display case for the little tchotchke that one has found in the archives. So for me, the most important thing is that while honoring the facts as I see them, as I know them, as I have access to them, which is partial, I mean, that's also number one, to realize how fragmentary historical truth is, and never, for myself, never to believe that I'm in possession of the ultimate truth about anything. It's just, I have this little shard, this little shrapnel that somehow speaks to me and rings true to me, and I will try to honor it as best as I can and write around it and highlight it in a responsible, ethical, I think is a right word to use in this context, in an ethical way. But I also see how research, which ought to be ultimately a way for us to be able to imagine with greater sharpness, with greater focus, ends up actually becoming a bit of a factual straitjacket, and sucks the air out of writing. I mean, I've seen it almost happen to myself. I've seen it happen almost and fully to other people, and again, this sort of referential fetish ends up becoming what drives the writing, and I think, to use a slightly awkward and kind of gross word, let's remember that imagination is really the driving force for fiction, at least the way in which I view it, how I read it, how I try to write it. It's trying to conjure up things that might have happened, didn't happen, and try to picture possible worlds and other consciousnesses and so on and so forth. And I think whatever happens in the archive really ought to be at the service of that and not support. There is a hierarchy for me. Yeah.
I agree totally. And I like your word fetishizing, because when I would read historical fiction or really any sort of fact-filled fiction that felt too filled with facts, I would think, oh, the writer's showing off. But what I realized now when in writing Manhattan Beach, it's not, at least in my case, the problem wasn't showing off. The problem really was fetishizing. So I just was so excited that I knew so many facts that it was very hard to resist bestowing upon the lucky reader all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best research really is the one that doesn't show. It's
absolutely.
It's so depressing when you read a novel and what you said, or even worse, when it feels Googled. That's the pits. But so yes, it's really, I think research ought to be sort of, or should be, learning a language, the language of the time and the atmosphere of the time, and then it becomes the weather of the novel. And you're not describing the weather all the time. If you are, there's a problem. But you should just feel the weather. And so that's the way in which I approach research, and I think perhaps you will agree.
I do. So was there a phase where you had to kind of comb out facts?
Yeah. Yes, pretty late, and I want you to answer the same question when I'm done. But kind of late for me, because I to use, again, sort of a shipyard simile, my ship is a very slow-moving one. I don't draft. I put a lot of pressure on each sentence.
You don't... Wait, say that again?
Yeah. No, I don't allow myself to move on to the next sentence until the one that I'm finishing doesn't, like, not
so
suck.
we write in opposite ways. So this is cool.
Yeah.
All right, go on.
We talked a little bit about this in the past. It doesn't mean that sentence is done. I will edit it infinitely, but it's what I'm trying to say is there are no placeholders. It's a bit above a placeholder. So again, things move very, very slowly. So I do have time to see the iceberg, and hopefully steer away from it. With trust, however, one thing did happen. Can I tell a short anecdote?
Please.
All right. Okay. So the hardest bit, which also kind of was great when the book was being sold, because people who objected too strenuously to that bit were kind of not for me, is the second section of the book, which is where we hear this tycoon in this kind of grating, man-spreading voice, to tell about his many exploits. And for symmetry's sake, I thought this was going to be like 120 to 150 pages long, but I couldn't stand the man. And I couldn't imagine living with him for 150 pages, or making people live with him for 150 pages. So I kind of shattered the whole thing, and it became this highly fragmentary thing that it is today. And 3 years or so after publication, I still get emails from strangers saying, the novel is okay, but in section 2, like, your editor missed all these fragments and there's a problem in formatting. Oh, it makes me so happy because it worked. But that second part was exactly the part where I was flexing research. I knew so much about the crash. I had read, I won't say everything, but shelves, many shelves of, again, primary sources, accounts written back then, congressional hearings, financial publications, magazines, you name it. And I was excited to let everyone know how much I knew about it. And it was terrible. It was terrible. And that's why I ended up breaking the whole thing and getting rid of it. But it was painful because I thought I was throwing away work. But no, it was obviously the right thing. How about you? How was your pruning process?
Well, I think where I went most overboard, and I will just say it's amazing how many nautical metaphors we use today, was actually the stuff that takes place aboard a ship, which I didn't even get into. I was sort of horrified to find that kind of mental frisson was also starting to lead me to think a lot about ships. And I thought, oh, come on. Like, I'm already dealing with, Brooklyn Navy, shipbuilding, deep sea diving. I can't deal with gang stuff, which I knew nothing about. And then I can't deal with actual sailors. But lo and behold, I went to visit the Merchant Marine Museum on Long Island, and it was I was an immediate convert because merchant sailing is actually really fascinating. So I got sort of involved in that. And I had to learn a tremendous amount. And there were moments where I really lost faith in this book. And what kept me in it, I think, was how vibrant the research felt, even when, from an outside perspective, it really was pretty dry. And I remember one point of being at Crunch Gym and reading the third mate's handbook from 1941 or something, a tiny print, like 800 pages, and this onion skin paper, and just being riveted. And the person on the treadmill next to mine was looked over and looked just aghast that this could be considered suitable workout reading material. Anyway, the ship stuff, I think I was it's very analogous to what you're saying. I was so amazed that I actually began to feel kind of fluent in talking about the work of a third mate on a ship, and there's actually a shipwreck. All this stuff. I read lots and lots of accounts of shipwrecks during World War II, torpedo bombings. That part was just way too much, and I had to scale it back a lot. And that was a pleasure to do. I always find that when any actual sort of editorial decision is the right one, it always feels like a relief to do it, even as I resist it, and it felt like a real relief. I remember this friend of mine who read the draft said, "It gets a little too shippy."
I love it.
So I had to make it a little less shippy.
That's fantastic. He helped you stay sort of even keeled and
Exactly.
yeah, keep the narrative riveting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To the bitter end,
Yeah,
another nautical
that's right.
term, the last link in a chain.
So
I know.
we've been talking about research, its importance in our work, how to honor it, its pitfalls, its more exhilarating moments, but I don't think we've really defined what it means to us. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What is research to you? How would you define it?
I mean, I think research is just most basically acquiring knowledge that I don't have, which is essential for almost everything I've written. But I think the difference with Manhattan Beach was that I, very much the way you describe your situation with trust, I mean, I couldn't even conceive of how to begin without doing a fair amount of, I don't know if I could call it research, because I didn't know what I needed to know, but just moving around in the period. And that was where the oral history and all that came in. Because I write in an opposite manner to you, meaning that I write a first draft not knowing, having no idea what will happen. It's very, it is very improvisational. And so for Manhattan Beach, that meant, well, I don't know if you will be when I tell you this, that meant 28 legal pads full of handwriting, which I had to type up only to discover that they were beyond bad. I mean, they were horrific, because it was someone trying to write a historical novel with with a lot of technical stuff, with absolutely no freaking idea about any of it. So that was why I came close to losing faith in the project. So that feels like real research, where I just And honestly, I don't know if I could have done it if I hadn't had some journalism experience, which really helped me. Just dealing with archives and also just finding people to talk to, which I find super helpful. That's sort of the opposite of primary sources.
Right.
It's like the ultimate processing is just like talking to a knowledgeable person and hearing what they have to say. So that feels like research capital R, and then there's finding out things I need to know to write certain things, and that's research small r, I would say.
Oh, okay.
What do you think?
I like this tiered system. I have some issues with the word research. I have to confess that I'm sort of in the process of writing a little essay on research, coupled with another term in literature, which is experimental literature. I'm interested in these two. I'm not going to talk about experimental literature because it exceeds sort of the frame of this conversation. But what they both have in common is that we have decided in the arts and the humanities and the realm of fiction, we have decided to import these terms from the scientific realm. So I think the word research comes with a heavy epistemological burden, with very strict epistemological and methodological actually constraints and expectations. You start out from something that is known, and you try to prove that hypothesis or that point for the most part. It's repeatable. You should be able to fragment it in a Cartesian way to its most essential parts, and so on and so forth. I could go on. I think all of this is tremendously antithetical to fiction writing, and I think we have a much better word, which is the word that I champion in this context, instead of research, which is reading. It is better because reading does away with any pretense of objectivity. Also, reader invites affect into the picture, which research obviously eschews and frowns upon. You should remove yourself typically from the process and the results. Not so with fiction writing. And it also invites randomness and haphazardness. One of the best experiences that I've had in here was upstairs at the Otmar Reading Room, back when they had open stacks. I have notes about that, about the fact that they're not open anymore, because of the following. I would try to find stuff about literally office supplies in Brooklyn, in this area, in downtown Brooklyn, or bakeries, and looking at the yellow pages, looking at ads in phone books, and so on and so forth, and learning what the prices were, and little things, those little things for flavor that one adds, and proper names, big one. And then I would find something else just by doing this. I'm ashamed to confess I didn't know about Bernice Abbott's work before I started working on Trust, and that changed the book. Just her images of downtown Manhattan and Brooklyn, exactly during the time that I was writing about. Not kind of, almost in those blogs. It just I was there. It was incredible. And so that came not because of methodological rigor. It came just from messing around with the archives and allowing myself to be led by them. So that's very much the way you use the word frisson twice, and I love it, because I do have to. There is this electricity between the document and you know, oh, you and I are going to be friends and we're going to work together. And it's that collaboration with that piece of evidence that then occurs. And then I also have two tracks, because here we're talking about historical evidence, whatever that means to each one of us or to you guys. But then, for me, an integral part again is reading fiction of the time. So how were people from the 1880s to the early 30s, during that half-century span? How were they imagining these other worlds of extreme wealth, of destitution, and everything in between, touched by money, as most things sadly are? And that research actually is the most labor-intensive one, because this is not a figure of speech. When I'm writing a book, and I'm starting sort of on the next one now, I wake up and I'm reading novels and short fiction about this, and then I write, and then I go to bed and I fall asleep reading about this. Like I move to that world. You talked about talking to people. I have been hitherto a total and absolute misanthrope. I've just worked with paper, but for this book that's coming out in September, which deals to a large extent with particle physics, I did something that I broke one of my own constraints, which is go to the place and talk to the people. So I went to the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, and I spent 7 full days there, 500 feet on the ground, and had these amazing physicists who could barely look at me in the eye because they're like so involved with their own work, and I felt so bad for trespassing, but I had them help me build an impossible machine, and I'm kind of hooked. I feel that I want to. There was so much for me. I know you do this a lot. Maybe it's because of your journalism background, but it was new to me. It was a new experience to me.
Yeah, I would have to say, for me, reading I do a lot of reading in my research or my reading, but it doesn't get at there's so much of it for me is experiential. For example, just as one example, I ended up getting involved with a bunch of veteran Army divers, and they meet every other year for a reunion. And one thing they do at their reunion is they have a tank, and they give divers who want to the opportunity to wear the old Mark V diving dress, which is what I'm writing about in Manhattan Beach, and go into the tank. So I got to watch them do this, and they dressed me in the Mark V, which weighs 200 pounds. And I have photos of every moment of this. It was not a comfortable thing to wear.
Did you go into the tank?
No. That would have been quite dangerous. And in fact, someone did blow up while I was there, meaning that his suit inflated and he popped to the top, and it was like a nerve-wracking couple of minutes, and then everyone was laughing. But anyway, so a lot of that stuff happens for me, and I'm still in touch with these Army guys. So there's a lot of for example, artifacts. I went and found in the San Francisco Maritime Museum. You can get into their archives, which are where all the old diving dress and the old the generators and all of the oxygen. I'm like losing my terms, which is kind of sad. I knew it all at one point. Anyway, so looking at artifacts, talking to people, and just one more little example, and then we're opening it up. When I went to the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point and went to their museum, I talked to the interim director, and he said, merchant sailing is so little written about, actually. And he said, and it was so fascinating because it was a very kind of democratic and inclusive and diverse world where people of different races and people with problems that made mainstream life hard for them, like drug addiction, alcoholism, homosexuality, big problem in early 20th century, trying to live a mainstream life. all of that was accepted on ships because you're in an existential situation where you have to work together to stay alive. And so white people worked under the command of men of color. All of that happened, things that basically did not happen on mainland America. I don't know if I would have read that in any book. This was just a guy telling me why he was so interested in it. And that comment just opened up so many dramatic possibilities for me. And I'm so grateful for that conversation. So I would argue for some word that might not be research, but includes more than just reading.
No, I'm convinced and converted. Yeah, fully. Yeah. Shall we take some questions?
Let's take questions.
Yeah.
Yes. I think there is a process here
but
of
there is
microphones.
She wins, clearly. Yeah. Enthusiasm, promptness, and...
Hello, hi. One question for each, if I may. For Hernan, how do you decide, or why did you decide to write both books in English first? And for Jennifer, when you started writing Manhattan Beach, did you already knew how the ending would be without spoilers? Please.
I'm going to answer that quickly because it's so easy. Absolutely not. No way. I did not. I had no idea. And that's the case with me for every book. So that is the fun of writing it, in a way, is finding that out. Over to you.
I love that. Same. Oh, yeah, right. So I have like a moderately weird linguistic past. I was born in Argentina, but I grew up in Sweden, and my first social tongue was Swedish, and my first sort of meaningful book experiences were also in Swedish, and I have a bunch of short stories written in crayon at home in Swedish, and so I started writing in Swedish, really. And then we moved back to Argentina. I went to college there, but I didn't feel that was my place. Sweden also kind of was out of the picture. I had fallen in love with sort of the Anglo-American canon, whatever was accessible to a teenager in the 80s in Argentina. And I decided to shape my life around that very transformative experience, which was the encounter of those texts. So I moved to England for my graduate school and lived there for a couple of years, and then I moved to New York to pursue that very lucrative PhD, and and here I am, and I feel it's the language that I've chosen for myself. It's my language, rather than one that was imposed by circumstances. We're not in control.
Is there a person over there? Okay, hi. So you guys both talked about writing on something that you aren't subject matter experts in. I guess where did you find the audacity to think that you could become a subject matter expert? And how did you know when you were done?
In a way, I had a real crisis of faith because I lost my audacity. I think it began just as a kind of a curiosity-driven gamble. But then when I read that terrible first draft, and even when I started working on it and realized I could make it better, it wasn't really good enough for my standards. And so it felt a little like a language that I knew well enough to sort of have conversations about, daily life, but not to express any sort of interesting humor or ideas. I just wasn't fluent enough. And so I gave myself permission to abandon the book. And I thought, okay, you know what? You win some, you lose some. I've spent time on this, but that doesn't mean I should spend more time on it necessarily. So I decided I would abandon it. And then I thought, okay, so where do I want to be imaginatively? And for me, fiction is very place-driven, sort of place and atmosphere. And when I thought about where I wanted to be, it was right back to New York City during World War II through a noirish lens. So I realized, and that's where the research was so generative and so exciting, because I felt like that it was when I was reading things that shouldn't have interested me really, but felt so relevant and pertinent that I knew something would have to come of this. So I guess that was the research gave me the audacity. And knowing I was done, I mean, that's always a question. I mean, in a way, it's never really done. I removed some extra facts that I thought were too much after the book had already been printed. That was a first. I thought, do we really need to know what was in the lunchbox Anna bought on the pier? I don't think we need to know, even though I know. So it's never really done, but I guess for me, it gets to the point where I'm close enough. I'm close enough to stop.
For me, we're talking about the audacity, right? For me, that happens where I muster up the courage is when there is a particular alchemy or amalgamation between a certain intellectual curiosity that has to do with that I'm driven to a certain conceptual constellation that the project brings up, and it also because I have a deep past as a scholar. I think in terms of canon information and traditions and how that plays in a certain literary arc, sort of diachronically, historically, within the history of literature itself. It could be a genre, it could be, so I'm thinking how this hypothetical object would play into that, or how I would play with that. So all of this is completely cerebral, and I realize that. That's why I said an amalgamation, because on the other hand, there has to be, you use the word atmospheric to define the beginning of a project, and I fully relate. It is something that is very vague, but it's 100% emotional, and that I find a very hard time to describe. I know that the only way to describe it will be the 300 pages of the book. That's the only way. But it's as strong as it is vague. And when these two seemingly disconnected worlds connect, and I wish I knew how that happens. I'm not in control of it. When those two things are in touch, I know that very likely will be the next book. So there is that kind of scholarly, academic, if you will, component, but then there has to be depth of feeling. It's both of those things converging.
Over here, the books that you have talked about tonight and the research that you did, artificial intelligence would have been a non-factor during your period of research and writing. And that is not the case now, obviously. There's been this explosion. So from your perspective, each of you, is AI to be embraced and used, or is it to be avoided at all costs? Is it anathema? I mean, what's your relationship to AI?
Well, I'm in no position to tell anyone else what to do. I can just say that for myself, I have not used it. I'm very angry that these companies stole all of our work, fiction and nonfiction. I just object to it kind of on principle, and I feel like, so I'm supposed to pay them to use it? Really? I don't think so. That said, I'll take a good idea from any source. So, I'm not going to say never. All I can say is I have not.
Zero. I think intelligence is a hyperbolic choice to describe this product. Our agency has been suspended when it comes to.
So I wanted to say thank you for your wonderful books. I felt that I really lived in each of your books, in that space and in
Where
that
are you?
time.
Oh,
Hey. I want to ask a question about your childhoods. So I feel often writers say that they were voracious readers, and I wonder if you remember moments in your childhood where you were researching, like asking questions about the past or trying to figure out a mystery or gathering evidence. Yeah.
I think I was not that sophisticated, honestly, as a child reader. I mean, I was, a huge Nancy Drew fan. I was not, I don't, I mean, I read a lot. I read purely for escape. That's kind of still why I read, honestly. I'm a big fan of escapism, but I would call it transcendence, actually, being lifted out of my life into another sphere. I think that's always what's motivated me. But no, I don't think I approached reading that way as a kid. Not that I can think of. I think it was very much about escaping. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. It's escaping, but also at the same time, a heightened form of presence for me. I feel that I'm so much in a often preferable version of the world when I'm reading, but I'm very much in the world. It is very. It has to do with my senses. It's not purely in my head, for sure. So I agree. I can't remember. It's a really good question, and I was thinking if I had ever sort of at an early age ruined that experience for myself by doing that. I think I agree. I haven't. What I did start doing to my own detriment in my teens, when I don't know how this leaked that I played hooky to go to the library, but it's true. I became like a completist at a certain point. I would start reading something, and I had to read everything by that author. Total waste of time, but I subjected myself to that discipline for pointless for many years. Now I don't know. Yeah.
We have time for just one more question, and it will be over here, Tass. And following that question, Jenny and Hernan are going to be in the front, sitting at the table. They'll be happy to talk, sign books, and all of that. So. Last question.
Thank you so much. This has been so delightful and inspiring. So I have a sort of question for each of you, kind of related. So Hernan, I am curious if you have thought about, I love the talk about the subconscious and the frise. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to find out. And your obsession with things. And so it's awesome that what you were obsessed with became such a beloved book in the world. And so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about why you think in 2023, the collective consciousness or the judges of the Pulitzer, what about your book in 2023? It's an amazing book, but I'm curious why you think it became so popular. And Jenny, I really want to ask you about The Keep. And at first I was like, this is random, but then you started talking about imagination, and I thought it's a sign I should ask about The Keep. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts towards The Keep now? It's my favorite book of yours. So, and I want to ask you about the ending, but I don't want to spoil it for everyone. So.
All right, I'll do that quickly because The Keep is kind of my ugly duckling. It's my mom's favorite, but I think it's probably the least read of my books. It's a Gothic thriller. And speaking of childhood, a book that had a huge impact on me when I read it as a kid was Rebecca. And I feel like that, that's a terrific Gothic novel. And I've been interested in the Gothic the whole time. John Fowles wrote a really good Gothic novel also, The Magus. So well, first of all, I never reread my books. So what would I think of The Keep if I read it now? I don't really want to know. I remember it fondly. I stand by all of my books, and not rereading them is one thing that makes me able to do that. But I am proud of it because the Gothic usually asks the question, is this seemingly supernatural phenomenon that are occurring, can they be explained scientifically, or are we dealing with the supernatural? And my goal was to find a way not to come down on either side. And that I tried to do that. So I'm glad I found a way. And listen, I think it's a good book. Check it out.
I love that. I don't know how to answer your question because I'm not a sociologist. I honestly don't know. What I can tell you is I'm 52. I've been writing. You remember those crayons that I was? Yeah. So forever. I've been writing for forever, and I was published when I was bald. It happened super late for me, rejection was universal and enthusiastic for decades. Until 2017, which is like 5 minutes ago. So I've been doing the same thing forever, and then this strange thing happened. I honestly don't know. I have actually been a judge. I've judged a few literary awards, including the Pulitzer Prize ones. So I know sort of the inner workings of it. And I'm here to tell you that it's like there is no design, there is no rhyme or reason. It's 5 people, then a board of 19 other people, and things aligning in a way that you certainly are not at all in control of. I don't take any of it for granted. I'm very, very, very happy and grateful, but I can't break it down for you. I have no idea. Sorry.
Thank you all so much. It's
Yes,
been a
thank you.
pleasure. And thank you.